24 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. How much do you pay to the sport of, how much attention do you pay to the sport of boxing? It's more than fascinating when you actually get deep into it, and the personalities behind it. Paul Beston is on the phone. He's the managing editor of City Journal. He's an essayist, a journalist. He's a contributor to the City Journal, the Wall Street Journal, Pop Matters, the American Spectator, the American Conservative, Real Clear Sports, and it goes on and on and on. His new book is called The Boxing Kings. If you're looking at the streaming podcast right now on the video, instead of the camera being on us, we have the photo of the cover of the book, The Boxing Kings, which I got off of the Amazon website, where it is not only a 5-star, it has 5-star ratings, but it is number one in its category, and its category is boxing biographies. So let's say good morning and thank you for being on the air to Paul Beston. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Larry. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you so much for asking. Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Manhattan, where I work here in my office.
Are you a boxing fan? It's kind of an easy question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Were you a boxer wannabe at one time?
Yeah. In fact, I talk about that a little bit in the book's introduction. I never did anything formally with boxing, but I was blessed with older brothers. So we became really interested in boxing when we were growing up, and this would be the late 70s. And we eventually acquired all the equipment, the gloves and training gloves and speed bags and all that, and
oh my gosh,
instruction manuals. And we boxed for years. And one of my older brothers I went to the same college with, so we ended up staying up with it until we were getting out of school. At some point I figured I better quit while I'm ahead.
I always wonder what contributes to somebody being passionate about something. Was it your neighborhood? Was it a movie? What did it for you?
Yeah, I write about that a little because it is of interest to me. Is how did this all start? And for me, it was in the mid-late 70s. One thing that was really important to it is that boxing was on television a lot back then, and it is not now. And just regular network television. And of course, this is a pre-internet, pre-cable TV age too. Yeah. But I followed all the regular sports, but boxing was on a lot. And this is the era of the last few years of Muhammad Ali, so he was just a huge figure at that time, and on television a lot with Howard Cosell. And so everybody knew him, everybody talked about him, and I just became drawn into this sport. I think what really drew me in was the individual nature of it and the characters.
We have in our community a professional wrestler. He's retired. His name is Dory Funk.
Yes.
And he told me that what you saw in wrestling wasn't always an act, because we had this notion that wrestling was an act, boxing was real. Right. He told me it wasn't. It was not always an act. So, but boxing was never an act, right?
No, I mean, except for the fights in history that have been discovered to be fixed. Which,
okay.
There have been some things of that kind, but no. In general, boxing is absolutely dead serious, and there's no prearranged script.
No prearranged winner, except like you say, some of the fixed ones.
There have been some fixed ones in the past, and there was a big fight Saturday night that was on pay-per-view that had a disputed decision. That was the Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin fight, and one of the commentators, Teddy Atlas, who's a longtime boxing trainer, seemed to be suggesting that there were that money was involved in the judge's call on this. So I can't speak to that. I'm not close enough to it to know, but he seemed to be pretty upset by it.
Tell me about The Boxing King. Tell me about the book. Do you profile how many boxers do you profile?
Whoa, let's see. There were about 34 heavyweight champions in the period that I cover. I put the biggest focus on 7 that I thought were the ones that have meant the most outside the ring, not just as great fighters, but who have meant the most to Americans and are still remembered today. But I cover everybody from about the period of 1882, when John L. Sullivan is the first champion, right up to the beginning around the 21st century, when Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield are winding down, after which time the Americans pretty much vanished from the heavyweight division, and so that was a big focus of my book, is the way that this title used to almost always be an American property, and then that came to an end.
Jake LaMotta died a few days ago. I remember that being in the news. Is he considered one of the boxing kings?
No, he wasn't a heavyweight, but he fought in a golden era of boxing in the 40s, especially. So he just a very different time than today. These guys would fight several times a month, and they were not fighting patsies. They were fighting their top rivals. The purse money was obviously not what it would be today. So he just comes from a very different era, and of course people remember his name today probably mostly because of the Martin Scorsese movie. But he was a legitimately great fighter, regardless of movies.
Are women more boxing fans today than they were before, and then are more women actually in the rink? I mean, Muhammad Ali's daughter is in there.
Yeah, I don't know if she's still doing it, actually. I haven't kept up with her, but yeah, she was in it for quite a while, and she was very successful at it. Some of the other champs' daughters got involved too. Joe Frazier's daughter got in there, and one of George Foreman's daughters was in there. So that was really kind of a dynastic thing taking shape there for a little while. I have to think that there are more women fans now with women boxing, because women boxing is a pretty new development.
When somebody retires at a young age, was it Andre Ward? Is that the name, Robin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was only 30. He is only 33. Is that because of the pounding to the head? I mean, what is the real truth behind that? Did the pounding to the head affect Muhammad Ali, or was it pure Parkinson's? What was the story? I kind of asking several questions at once there, so I apologize.
Okay. No, well, I mean, as regards Ali, I don't think there's anybody outside of maybe his family, which seems to be somewhat uncomfortable with attributing it to boxing. I'm not quite sure why, but I don't think there's anybody else who doesn't think it had to do with boxing. It was always officially, in his case, known as Parkinson's syndrome,
right.
And they were always taking pains to distinguish it from Parkinson's. But to the casual eye, it presents exactly in the same fashion as Parkinson's. So. It's very hard to believe that it wasn't attributed to boxing, unless he had some kind of genetic affliction that had just a coincidental development that it tracked his boxing career exactly. Because you can go back to old clips today and watch his speech patterns change, and that's so hard not to think that that's the boxing that did it.
The statement from Andre Ward was, he said, "I want to be clear, I'm leaving because my body can no longer put up with the rigors of the sport, and therefore my desire to fight is no longer there." So at 33 years old, he's kind of listening to his body saying, "Look, I don't want to end up like Muhammad Ali," without saying that. I don't know if you think that's probably accurate?
Oh, sure. And of course, the question for Andre Ward will be, will he stick to it? I mean, the track record of champions retiring and then coming back is a very long one. So, of course, again, with the money that they make today, the amount of money, if they can be, just remotely responsible, they should be able to hold on to it. But it's been tough, for athletes in the past with money. I mean, they don't always have people looking after their interests. So we'll see if he can stay away. But I think it surely has to do with Ali and other fighters. And the other thing that's in the news, of course, more and more is football. So
right.
The awareness of that is really is growing.
And I think that's part of it too. The awareness. We are so aware of the fact that when you're in a physical sport where your head is a target quite often, or even if it's not on purpose, whether it's football or boxing, if you're in that sport, you have to kind of recognize that you better not do it much. Get out of the game as soon as you can. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons too that, especially in boxing, when a fighter won a title in the old days, I mean, their idea was hold that title, find opponents that would draw the biggest gate, that would bring in the most money, and if that opponent wasn't the top contender, that's just fine. If you can get a guy who can bring in the money, because this is a dangerous sport, the shelf life is short, and you go for the challengers that you can make the most money against. And people don't like that because they want to see the top number one guy fight the number two guy, but usually business interests have something to say about that.
Well, you also delve into the happenings of the era. You talk about Max Schmeling, you talk about the Nazis, and that's a pretty fascinating part of this book as well.
Right. Yeah, Max Schmeling, one of the few non-American champions before recently, who was briefly champion in the early 30s, but then he has a remarkable second career. He kind of puts his career back together in the mid 30s, and by now the Nazis are in power in Germany. And once he starts running off some successes in the ring, they really adopt him as a representative of Aryan supremacy and all that business. But a lot of debate about Schmeling that continues to this day about how willing a participant he was in that. He was not formally a Nazi, and certainly he lived a very long life afterward, and became friends with Joe Louis, his great rival. So, but some people, David Margolick particularly, wrote a great book about this about 10 years ago, feel that Schmeling was really an opportunist, that he went with the Nazis when they were on the up, and then he knew how to change his behavior when fortunes changed. But people have different opinions about that.
We did a phone-in interview with George Foreman, and one of the things he said that stuck with me was that the kids today don't even know he was a boxer. They know him for the grill.
Right.
Yeah, well, one writer called the Foreman grill the most iconic American appliance since the Franklin stove, and it's true. You just hear casual people who probably don't know the first thing about boxing talking about, I've got my Foreman grill. I'll put this all on the Foreman grill. It really has become a phenomenon of its own.
Do you know who else we had? We had Max Baer Jr., the guy who played Jethro Bodine on the Beverly Hills. His dad wasn't his dad one of the heavyweights? Yeah,
he was.
Is he
Max Baer?
Is he considered one of the kings?
Well, he's in the book. He's one of the heavyweight champions here. He's not one of my top guys in terms of his significance, because he was only champion very briefly for about a year. On the other hand, he's one of my favorites because he's such an entertaining and appealing guy to write about. He really wanted to be a stand-up comic, and he was a pretty darn good one. He was quite funny. He had a terrific sense of humor, and his sense of humor didn't end in the ring either. He was often clowning in the ring. He had a little bit of a pre-Muhammad Ali aspect to him, but he didn't love boxing, and he just didn't take it seriously enough, and as a result, he lost his title probably earlier than he should have.
One of the things that I think attracted me to the movie Rocky was, in addition to the boxing, was sort of the culture behind the scenes. Like there was, it almost seems like there's two cultures. There's the small time culture that early Rocky was in, and then the big time culture that I'm talking about the first movie now. And so is that accurate? I mean, is there a big time culture almost like showbiz?
Yeah, in fact, I think that the boxing, boxing old timers and lifers, for lack of a better term, would tell you that it's the loss of that small time culture that's really hurt the sport. That what most people know about boxing today is the pay-per-view fight. The big fight, the Mayweather, or the fight that we had on Saturday night. And the big money fights, and they don't know anything about anything beneath that at the divisional level, let alone at what used to be in the old days in America a huge thriving club scene, club fights, in small towns, in cities, and just boxing matches all over the place. And those were like for any sport, those are the training grounds for other fighters. And when that dried up, it's been harder to find good fighters. So there has been a kind of a separation between worlds that way.
You had one of the posters in the book is Private Joe Louis says we're going to do our part and we'll win because we're on God's side. It's refreshing to know that religion played a part in their personal lives as well, and they weren't afraid to express that in public.
Yeah, and it's refreshing to hear you say it's refreshing. I mean, Louis, those words became some of the most famous words spoken during the war years in America, and that image I have in the book there is that the U.S. Army, that took that, of course, for a recruiting poster. Once they heard that phrase, they said, "That's got to run with that one." And Louis was an interesting guy that way because he had almost no education at all, and but he had a knack for saying memorable things. I mean, he also said about an opponent who he was going to fight a few years later, who was known for evasion. He said, "How is he going to get?" They're asking him, "How are you going to track him down?" He said, "Well, he can run, but he can't hide." And that's a phrase you still hear today.
Sure is.
But those were words that really inspired Americans, and they had a lot to do with Joe Louis's place in American life, because his great contribution, I think, which is overlooked a lot, is he really paved the way for Jackie Robinson. He was heavyweight champion. He won the heavyweight title 10 years before Jackie Robinson got into the major leagues with the Dodgers in 1947, and he was alone at that time in American sports as a black athlete in the America of that time. And the goodwill that he created and all of the barriers that he broke down really created the climate that Jackie Robinson could do what he did, and Jackie Robinson said so himself. So I think Joe Louis really gets overlooked in that way.
We are talking to Paul Beston. He's the author of The Boxing Kings, When American Heavyweights Ruled the Ring. Let me squeeze in a few phone calls here. We got a few people wanting to say hi. Good morning. Thank you for calling in, for waiting. You're on the air with Paul Beston.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Let me see. There was Barney Ross, who retired from the ring and went into the Marine Corps and fought at Guadalcanal, and of course he came home wounded and became addicted to morphine, but he beat it. And then one of the other colorful ones was Primo Carnera, who was involved in some fights where opponents took a dive. Maxie Rosenblum was another colorful one, I'll hang up and listen to your reply.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, boxing just has no shortage of colorful characters. I mean, we were talking in the beginning how I got into this, and I just think that no sport has ever put up. I mean, in part because it's an individual sport, but there's just the drama of it inherently in watching these guys walk down the aisle and get into the ring, and knowing that what they're doing is extraordinarily dangerous and tough to do, and it takes genuine courage to do it. And just the backgrounds of these guys and the life stories of them is very, very vivid, and that was really what I was trying to capture in the Boxing Kings. But as the caller says, I mean, these boxers, they don't have to be heavyweights. They're from really all the divisions. There are just stories galore, and you could read about them all day.
Well, you also give us the history of the belt, the winning belt that they always tote around.
Yeah, well, it's not quite the same belt, but yes, it's the same belt symbolically, and it does have an interesting history in terms of the physical history of it. At least the original belt, which was given to John L. Sullivan in Boston in 1887, and one of the things I really liked about that is that it was given to him on July 4th. And it's just another one of those things about this title that it seemed very quickly to get identified with America. And it says on the belt, presented to John L. Sullivan, the champion of champions by the citizens of the United States. I mean, it sounds almost like an inauguration, And so he had that belt for a while, but he ran into financial trouble because he was a big spender and a big drinker. And he eventually essentially pawned it. And I'm a little fuzzy on the details here, but I think what happened was a beautiful facsimile of the belt was made, which I believe is in the Smithsonian now. But since then, the belts have not been obviously that same belt; they've just been replicated. But it does have this physical kind of presence to it that champions, even today, when they win a big fight, you can see them. They're holding up those belts, even if they don't have as many diamonds as that one did.
Yeah, right.
Wow. Let me squeeze in another call. Good morning. Thank you for calling in, for waiting. You're on the air with Paul Beston.
Yes, thank you. Many people consider Rocky Graziano as the greatest fighter ever. Do you mention him in your book?
Well, no, Rocky maybe you mean Rocky Marciano. A lot of people mix up those names, but he was a heavyweight. Graziano was a middleweight and welterweight. But assuming you're mentioning Marciano, he has a special place of distinction because he's the only heavyweight champion never to lose a fight. He retired with this memorable record of 49-0, which was in the news recently because Floyd Mayweather was trying to win his 50th fight and go 50-0. I don't think that I would put Marciano as the very top heavyweight of all time, but I do think that for a guy with a 49-0 record, he's strangely underrated. He doesn't always get the credit that I think he deserves. I would probably still put Muhammad Ali at the top of the list of the greatest heavyweights myself.
And is part of that because of the showbiz talent, or the showbiz? How do I say, the savvy, or just it seemed like Muhammad Ali had that understanding of how to work the cameras and the microphones.
Oh, he's unquestioned. But the reason I put him at the top is just purely for if you just look at ring, work in the ring and leave that stuff aside, and that's certainly interesting and a whole other story in itself. But I think Ali deserves his top spot because he beat the best competition that any of these guys ever fought. I mean, when you've beaten Joe Frazier and George Foreman and Sonny Liston, that's quite a resume, and I think Ali deserves his spot for those achievements.
And you even tried boxing.
I'm sorry.
Did you try boxing yourself?
I did try boxing myself with my older brothers when we were growing up, and we did quite a bit of it for years actually. But I never did it formally. I never went to a gym or anything like that. I probably just had too much good sense. I realized I was, but I did love it. I loved doing it with my older brothers, and I think that was just the right speed for me because being older than I was, they presented a good enough challenge for me, and we enjoyed it. We did it for many years when we were younger.
We were sent an excerpt from it, and in the excerpt you talk about how you were hit, I think, in the jaw. Is it still hurt to this day?
No, but it did hurt. It did hurt for a day or so, a day or 2 days. It started to make me nervous. That was one of the last times I did spar when I was about 21, and I just thought, maybe it's time. Maybe you should.
I have
get a life.
My daughter-in-law, my son's wife, is she boxes. I don't know if she actually competes or she just spars. I don't know, but I've watched the videos of her. We have a pretty good boxing community here in our town.
Yes, we do.
And she's part of that, and I've never actually seen her box except for on videos, and I wouldn't want to get hit by her. That's what I know. Paul, thank you for being on the air with us today. The book is called The Boxing Kings. I found it on Amazon. It is #1. Did you know it was #1?
I didn't actually know that. Things move quickly. I knew that it was that the first printing had sold out and they were just restocking the book. So it's exciting to see. It seems to be doing okay so far.
Well,
thank you for telling me.
I think during radio interviews, not to blow our own horn, but I think that helps. Boxing biographies is the category #1, and good luck and congratulations on everything. And thank you for taking time to be on the show. Do you want to direct us to a website that you've got set up for yourself?
Sure. My website is just paulbeston.com. You can there's a lot of my other articles on there, not just on boxing, and there's an excerpt from the book that I posted there from the whole introductory chapter for people who don't have the book yet.
I wonder how many people who have never really paid attention to boxing will now start to, because you've given us the culture. I think the book seems to, from what I've read, give us that behind the scenes feel too. That's what always attracted me.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to capture that because I'm old enough to remember a time when casual fans and really non-fans of boxing knew who these guys were, and they would just come up in conversation, and I was fascinated by that. And how did that happen? And how did they represent things outside the ring? And they really did for a long time.
Paul, thank you for being on the air with us. Again, the book, The Boxing Kings by Paul Beston, Beston. His website is paulbeston.com. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Great being with you.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. Hurricane Maria is moving over or very close to Turks and Caicos in the Bahamas today. Back in Puerto Rico,
as anxious residents wait for help, they are assessing the damage and starting the recovery process. But most of the island is facing weeks or months without electricity.